Departing New Zealand Rugby boss Steve Tew says at times he's felt personally let down by players, but he thinks the organisation has greatly improved its attitude towards women. Tew will step down as CEO at the end of the year after a 25-year involvement with the game. He played a large role in securing the hosting rights for the 2011 World Cup, has overseen World Cups for the All Blacks and Black Ferns, and has helped convince the best players to stay in the face of increasing pressure from cash-rich overseas clubs. Tew was at the helm when several off-field incidents led to NZR commissioning a respect and responsibility review in 2016, following criticism about players harassing and behaving violently towards women. He spoke to RNZ's rugby reporter Joe Porter about the ups and downs in the job.
I'm really proud of winning a large number of world trophies across both men's and women's and 15s and 7s. Every moment that you see a New Zealand team on the top of the world, that is something pretty special. But I'm equally proud when we say we've got a safer game than we had 10 years ago.
What's been the most difficult or challenging issue you've faced in your time?
Again, as I said before, I think the earthquakes in Christchurch and having to move a significant chunk of Rugby World Cup was disruptive to running the tournament for sure, but it was just heartbreaking for those communities. But again, I'm incredibly proud that rugby played its part in the rebuild, because the Crusaders that year were a beacon. They were something that, and I talk about this a lot overseas, if you want to see what sport can do to inspire and unify, then World Cup in 2011 was a great moment. We won, everyone got obviously inspired and unified. But in Christchurch, earlier that year, the Crusaders just kept that community going through 10,000 aftershocks.
The incidents that led to the respect and responsibility review, that period, did you find that personally affecting at all?
Oh, well, it was disappointing for all of us because the game was getting dragged, if you like, through some pretty untidy headlines. And some of the analysis of that was fair and some of it was a little bit over the top. But there's no point in dwelling on that. What we said was we could say that the players' behaviour just reflects New Zealand and therefore we just got to accept that and that's our bit. Or we can do as we did. We can say, okay, we probably can do better than we are. Let's get a group in to have a look at that. Give us some advice. And they gave us about 70 recommendations. And we're busy modifying some of them, but largely putting them into place. And as I've said a lot since that time, that will be the thing that defines our game, I think, over decades, is that we will be able to have helped this country tackle some of the things which we shouldn't be so proud about.
When some of that less than noble behaviour reflects on NZR and ultimately you, does it hurt at all personally?
Well, I mean, you can say no, can't you? But you're not telling the truth. I mean, the reality is when you are the face of an organisation that has been criticised, and particularly criticised for things as, I guess, so sort of deep as violence, domestic violence, lack of respect, homophobia, then you take those things seriously. But there has to be a point where you can draw a line and say, well, actually, I know what I am, I know my values, and I know the kind of culture I've created around my own life, and you just go back to that. But you've got to get on and do something about it, and we did.
Player retention, the ever, I guess, evolving battle. You guys have done remarkably well in keeping the top players, well, most of the top players here over the last decade. Is it a battle that you can win, or will it get harder and harder to win this fight?
Well, we have to win it, and whoever sits in my seat will have an able group of people that have got a lot of experience in here in doing just that. Our contracted group and the relationships we have with some key player representatives. I'd mention Warren Alcock as one down in Dunedin, who's a very unsung hero in this regard because he's advised a number of our leading players who have been catalysts for keeping a broader group. So when you keep Richie and Dan, we kept a whole lot of that generation. When we kept Sam and Kieran, we kept a whole lot of that generation. It was great that Sam Whitelock recommitted because that's going to help with this current bunch, and we're well advanced on some good discussions with other players. So yeah, lots of people help in that regard, but it's getting harder, but it was never easy.
Strength and the growth in the women's game and obviously wanting to continue that momentum. How important is it to recognise what's going on in New Zealand with a fully professional women's competition, and how far away do you think that is?
We said for some time now that what we want to do is to have an organic development of the women's game, so we want there to be an appropriate infrastructure in behind any future competition, and so that competition is still a year or two away and the shape of it's not yet been decided. But in the meantime, we've invested quite heavily at Provincial Union level around academies and personnel to develop better athletes. And so, as I say, we're trying to... But there are some lessons from some of the other sports that have jumped quickly to a league and not necessarily had the investment underneath to sustain it.
And Pacific Rugby, do you feel New Zealand Rugby has an obligation or a moral obligation or ethical obligation to help protect the game and promote the game in the Pacific and grow the game there? And I guess, be a little bit of a protector or a knight for the Pacific in that sense.
Oh, there's two answers to that question. One is New Zealand is located in the Pacific, and therefore New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand generally has a deep responsibility to ensure that we do all we can for our Pacifica neighbours, not just in sport, education, trade, welfare, medical stuff. And when there's a disaster, which often afflicts islands. In New Zealand, I mean, there is no doubt. You only have to look at the panels around here that the Pacific culture is ingrained in our jerseys. The Black Ferns and the All Black jerseys are deeper, and their legacy is deeper for the influence we've had from Pacifica. But a lot of that Pacifica now, of course, is second or third generation New Zealander. But we certainly take our role seriously around the World Rugby table. We've advocated for change of governance, which has now seen Fiji and Samoa join the council table. We've advocated strongly for any new competition to take a serious look at all Tier 2 countries. And at the moment, that is one of the big issues around this new comp, is that where does promotion relegation sit? And it's not just actually about Fiji and Samoa, but it's also about Romania, Georgia, and other developing countries. We've always tried to take a broader leadership role, while at the end also making sure that what's right for New Zealand is also taken into account.
And that's Steve Tew, the outgoing boss of New Zealand Rugby. He was speaking to Joe Porter there.